Okay, I think we'll get started. Any objections? None heard. Motion carries. Outstanding. All right, we're going to have a hopefully much more interactive panel this time. Oh, I appreciate the standing. Yes, we are up to an outstanding start. Thank you, sir. Welcome. My name's Todd Kline. I'll be serving as the referee/moderator. Will hopefully not be a brawl here on stage between our two luminaries here who are going to be speaking. I would like to introduce them. David Carroll. David is a cyber strategy and capability vice president at GDIT and a U.S. Navy Reserve officer with over 2 decades of experience spanning national security, cyber ops, and critical infrastructure protection. He has led large-scale cyber infrastructure initiatives across government industry, including work as CISA senior executive with DHS, with NATO and international partners, and Fortune 100 technology firms. David brings a strategic perspective on the intersection of cyber capability, governance, and national defense. Our second guest, Christopher E. Greene, is a senior national security advisor and technology integrator with more than 3 decades of experience leading complex programs involving AI, emerging technologies, intelligence, emergency management, and chemical and biological defense across the full spectrum of the federal government. Currently, Mr. Greene is the division manager for ANSER's Future Capabilities Division, leading corporate growth that accelerate mission outcomes, such as quantum computing and anticipatory intelligence capabilities. Mr. Greene previously led ANSER's Chemical and Biological Matters Division, providing innovative solutions and strategic leadership to the chemical and biological defense enterprise. His previous roles span the full gamut of first responders, hazmat ops, FEMA urban search and rescue, the 2001-2002 Anthrax attack response incident command, insider threat, C4ISR integration, and enterprise emergency management. Please welcome our guests. And in brief, I'll be your moderator, Todd Kline. I'm a recovering attorney who saw a few good men in high school and being easily impressionable, spent the next 23 years after law school as an active duty Navy JAG, primarily spanning my career across the OCONUS operational, combat, and intelligence community theaters, and was blessed to retire as an 06 here as the senior strategic and legal advisor to the Navy's wing of the JSOC enterprise. So with that, let's get rolling. The situation is a little fluid right now, domestically, internationally, when it comes to threats. Of course, we're all tracking, we've spoken about the US being involved in a period of international conflict overseas, which always creates a heightened threat presence in the United States, which we've seen unfortunately reflected in the news. But the US is also planning to host some of the world's largest public events over the next 10 years, with 3 of them occurring in the next 2 years, primarily being the World Cup being held for the first time across 3 nations, the US, Mexico, and Canada, which will be not only just the largest sporting event in world history, but the largest iteration of that sporting event in world history, spanning 104 matches across 6 weeks. 60 of those matches will be held in the United States across 11 different venues spanning the entire coast. We also then have the America 250 celebration, which will primarily be held between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City between July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. In 2001, on 9/11, we had planes plunge into some of our most iconic and governmental buildings. One of the unfortunate and terrible effects of that was the lack of movement that occurred nationally across the next week. Planes were not flying. Goods were not being transported. And the economic ripple effects, if you took a look at it, lasted for years. The ability for Americans to move about and gather freely is one of our great privileges and rights enshrined in the Constitution, but it's also one of the most fragile. So with such vulnerability, where we are arguably no more vulnerable than we are out gathered together in large groups, how do we maintain threat awareness, utilizing the best that AI has to offer, much of what has to be done, collected, analyzed, and actioned while completely in the field? So with that, David, coordination here is key, because this is a challenge that crosses all federal, state, local, tribal, territorial boundaries. What role should AI play in coordinating security across federal, state, local, and private partners during such large public gatherings?
It's a great question. Last week I was actually at the Billington State and Local Summit, and as someone who spends most of my time in intelligence and homeland security of various aspects or the Department of Defense, it was very enlightening to talk about the deficits, particularly in my area of specialization, which is cybersecurity. AI has already become one of our adversaries' tools, and the coordination, if you take a state, for example, Texas just stood up their own cyber command. Why did they do that? because it's such a vast area with so many utilities and so many pillars or towers, as they call them, that it's very difficult to try to talk to one another. So if you hear former Admiral T.J. White talk, he'll talk about how hard it is to collaborate, how it's a great word, but it's really hard to do. So what can AI do? At the national level, when I was at CISA, I was already starting to develop what I would call agentic threat hunting. And so what that was instead of having 300 analysts there who could never match the speed of a machine threat, we just have the machine run with the threat, and so hunt actively. Not perfect, not as advanced as some of the tools that are coming out in the last 6 months even, but the coordination there is data must become information in order to be effective must become action. And so the bridge from information, as we'll talk about, data is fundamental to all of it. AI can actually, when you bring it in, it's almost endemic to organize that data and to bring it in, reduce it, be economical with it, and get it right. You've heard about AI governance for the last few sessions. That bridge from information to action becomes very important because humans can't communicate that fast, whether it's a national emergency, whether it's a cyber one, whether it's it crosses state boundaries. We need that. We need these. And I like the prior panel. I always say that we are the pilot to the co-pilot, which is AI. So that co-pilot should be the one running the communication. Basically getting the information to folks so that the pilot can take action.
Yeah. So following up on that, so looking at just the vast amount of information that you get bombarded with on a daily basis, from whether it's ads or anything else, just think of it from an instant command standpoint, or from a senior leader decision maker standpoint. Just all the different information coming in. You can either harness that using AI, or you can become a victim of it, right? I've stood up and commanded multiple operations centers in the past. And you have to filter. A lot of times I would filter my staff from all the information that was coming in, just so, number one, they could do their jobs, right? And number two, they wouldn't get into information paralysis, right? So decision paralysis, because, well, we're waiting for this one more bit of information. Do we need it, or do we just go, right? 80% go, let's do it, right? Let's move.
Make a decision.
And if you distill everything about AI down, right now, its best use is decision support, right? From where we take all this various amounts of information from different sources at different levels, right? Very high level or very tactical information coming in, and distill it down so it's bullet points that I can then read really fast and make a decision, right? And what does that do? It gives us a shorter flash to bang, right? I can get the information, I can respond to it, we can have action so much faster by harnessing AI. And so that's where I think the biggest benefit to any national emergency or any operation comes from, is just a faster decision cycle.
So when we talk about, we have data, and we've heard all that, so working in a Homeland Security environment, it's incumbent upon the government actor to always be factoring in the law enforcement related paradigm. Unlike necessarily, though we've seen a lot of bleed over in the last 20 years with the global war on terror, but taking into account the fact that Homeland Security operations ultimately are criminal investigations in a way, and ultimately could end up being presented for some type of conviction-related effort in court. So the quality of data, the access to data, and all the rest is a challenge. But when we talk about, to start maybe baseline, we talk about AI in field operations, what do field operations mean to you? Where are we talking about?
So you make a contrast between the custodial use of data, like my DOJ cousins would have done for prosecution, vice the immediate action, which generally has to become what we would term on my Navy side, or even when I talk about it, as signal, right? I need to take that data and I need to I don't need to collect all the information and sit on it like a warm nest. I need to get the certain bits of information that tie everything together to get me to the lineage of the threat, so that I can figure counter operations against it. And that, in the amount of data that we see, whether it's information technology, whether it's sensor technology, and it's something I've kind of gotten a little bit more into since I've gone to General Dynamics. It's it's an immense amount of data. And then you introduce Internet of Things, which is, tenfold of that. Getting that signal is what's really critical for decision operations, as we were just talking, getting things up through the chain and getting to that, best top 3 things that you could do today. I think is where data needs to go.
And Chris, when we talk, for you, who's been out in the field, first responder, hazmat, we're talking a field operation. Where's the AI application both needed and also currently being applied, and you think in an effective manner?
Well, in the incident command system and national incident management system, right? It's a layered and tiered effect. So, it is all interdependent, right? From field operations, from the incident command post out to to my frontline responders that are out there. It's incumbent that they get the right information, but they're not overwhelmed by it, so they can make decisions. I mean, they're up front, they're well trained, right? So they know what to do without that AI interject. What AI could really help me with in a command post is, I know working with Command and Administration Command with the regional operations centers and then our big operations center on the Navy Yard, I wanted to come up, we were trying to use SharePoint to come up with this automated, give me the commander's brief real quick, right? My quad, right? Bring in,
If you get that done, please let me
last
know.
24, next 24, what I need, what's going to
Yep.
kill us, right?
Yep.
That type of
72-hour cycle.
stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
And getting that in there, getting it fast and automating that, right? But just think if in a command post, that was given to me through MCP and some other thing, right? MCP is wild, right? Coming in there because it is a true systems of systems that's out there, bringing in all these disparate information channels into me, providing me real-time commander update brief, right, a cup. And then, as we're moving down and conditions change in the field and our sensors are giving us more information, or we're getting spot reports or field reports from guys with eyes on, and it continuously updates. So then I can better manage my resources, whether it's personnel, whether it's, things that are coming in my equipment. We literally during the anthrax attacks ran out of Tyvek suits. We were down to, I don't know what we were wearing half the time, right? But also, from a health and safety standpoint, to better characterize the site, characterize what we're going into, updating that with the most, the best intelligence that we have at that point, from both a health intelligence standpoint as well as a threat intelligence standpoint, to help us not make bad decisions. I mean, some of the bad decisions that we made during the anthrax attack was, everyone, all your responders have to double up on their Tyvek suits. Okay, what did that cause me? A lot of heat casualties, right? Had a lot of firefighters going down, a lot of responders going down, and we had to deal with that. So we set up a forward resuscitation post there at Brentwood and some other places I was at, just to treat those heat casualties. But in the bottom line analysis was none of the suits that worked, that we had, would work against the concentrations we were dealing with in there. So we were basically relying upon Cipro just to keep us alive, and some other things to keep us going. The Pappers helped some too, but if we would have known that and could have modeled and ran modeling and simulations on that to go, yeah, guys, this size of anthrax is going to go right through any suit you have, I could have saved a lot of heat casualties, right? We could have, instead of dropping my force by a third, we could have kept those guys going. So hopefully jump.
So kind of similar. I took a little trip to Central Asia back in 2019, courtesy U.S. Navy Reserve, go Navy. Came back during COVID, and they stuck me at the Pentagon, and I was working for OpNav, and the boss was my former CO, and he was walking around. He said, "Hey, we got this at the time Microsoft, Google engineer. Let's put him to work." And so first thing they told me to do is go down to the N3, N5 watch floor, the Pentagon's watch floor, and solve this COVID reporting problem. They didn't want any more carrier captains to get fired. Seems reasonable. The problem,
they're very expensive.
So to take the opposite side of what AI can do and what we were doing with advanced data analytics, we're using the Jupyter system that the DoD puts out, and the Navy's version of that pillar is Jupyter. I think they call the Army's Blade or something. Everybody has their own tower. But I'd been in advanced analytics. I'd been doing things like this. So went down there, and lo and behold, how are we going to report? Well, we had 14 different types of reporting. OpNav, OpRep, SITRep, Navy Blue, you name it. We had everyone on the planet that are 50 years old. I think what AI did there is because I basically said, hey, we're just going to do this all in SharePoint. We've got one net on OCONUS, we've got NMCI, CONUS, 2 networks. They're controlled. You know, I happen to know the CIO. We can go talk to him and get this tech, and the technology's already there. We don't have to buy anything. What it did for us, though, when we were doing those analytics, because we had the PPE problems, we didn't know where to shift things. So what we did is first thing was, what is truth? And the wonderful thing about machines, you can program in bias, but if you just let the data come, it is they're non-emotional. They just report what has gone through the method. We can talk about bias probably in a different discussion, but that was one of the first things. There was no human chop chain there that would cause you like, I'm worried about my command, so I don't want to report. The way we did it was, if you were a sailor, you went on the portal, you said, I believe I have a case, or if you're the if you're the medical officer and you say, we have a case, that went up, and it was irrevocable fact at that point. So we couldn't massage it, because you guys saw kind of what was going on. There was, various levels of denial up and down, and that's just the way the military works. You can't fix that. But it did level it out. So we had truth in numbers. What did that do? Then we took it and we banged it up against the big data analytics at Defense Health, so we could move PPE faster. So there was a positive outcome because of the lack of bias. And now in the 4 or 5 years now since then, I was one of the ones I was at Google when they did that wonderful demo, and it came out with the wrong answers in Europe. And you can bias a model very easily, but in this case, the technology, the use, and I would refrain to using AI. It was more like using large language models and advanced analytics, but give it a little bit of regenerative capability, and you have pretty much a GPT of sorts.
Right.
But I thought that actually gave me hope. And also, like you said, one of the things I look at right now is command and control of cyber is incredibly difficult. There's 9,000 opinions. Everybody's a smart analyst. You've got 400 people sitting around Mac workstations with a ton of Red Bull, and they've got a ton of data, and they go after it, and then they want to sit on it and they find it fascinating. Well, the last thing that you need at the command and control level, because you have to make quick decisions, is that fascination. So I always try to tell folks, when I'm on the floor, we're not here to make big haystacks. We're here to build sharp needles. And that's what I think that these agentic tools can do for us. So at field operations, I think there's a lot of promise if we get it right.
So you both said something that I want to kind of key in on, and hopefully I can tie this together. Kind of in reverse, David, you just mentioned there, like the haystack. And I often view this, it's not necessarily finding the needle in the haystack, it's removing the hay, right? Because like the commander's like, there's like, tell me what I can ignore. Like, I'll pay attention to what I want to pay attention to. I'll make the decision about importance, but tell me what I can just filter out. So let's remove the noise, right? Yeah. And then you mentioned something else, Chris, on the modeling side. If I might want to take that to being a little bit predictive. So we're talking about threats. And I would posit that threat and risk are sometimes dependent interchangeably, because a risk can be a threat, of course, if it becomes real. So, something that we don't want to happen. And there's a way that we can mitigate risk, but you can never eliminate risk. Politically, everyone's a zero-sum game. That's just not going to be the case. And the key factor in mitigating risk is identifying that it exists to begin with, right? So you have to know that it's there. As an example, I'd argue every one of us are going to today, on the way home, do the most dangerous thing that we'll do in our lives, and that's drive. But we mitigate that due to necessity, training, experience, and trust. But we take that risk every single day. We do the risk, we haven't eliminated it, but we've mitigated it. So when we start moving into threats, whether they be accidental, so if I'm walking outside and a drone hits me in the head accidentally or purposefully, I kind of don't care because the impact to me is the same, but the risk still existed. So you told me something on the phone the other day, which is model the daylights out of everything. So moving into that predictive side, what do you mean by, like, how does that apply for this?
Sure. So looking at modeling, right? So as we find more, fine tune AI, and especially the LLMs that we're utilizing, modeling it, because it doesn't cost us that much of anything, some energy, a little bit of time. But in the old days, right? 3 years ago, tabletop exercise, full-scale exercises, all these things, and just going through the scenario after scenario after scenario with people that have their own biases, right? I mean, how many of us have done a full-scale exercise and everybody lived from a fairly serious attack, right? There were no casualties. Everybody made it home, right? That's not reality, right? Reality says something very different when we get in there, but because there's certain egos around the table that we don't want to ruffle their feathers. Yes, you did perfect. Everyone got deconned in 3.7 minutes. That's amazing. You did a great job. Go home now. But that's not reality. But we can build these models now to continuously run these scenarios, run it with what we know, right? So AARs, lessons learned, exercises, all these things that we've worked through, real world events that we've worked through in the past, run those scenarios again, look at the outcomes, run it with more speculative information, right? Things we think we know, right? Run those again and see what the outputs are now. And then a lot of times people stop at that. My big thing, so my colleagues know I have a big poster in my office and it says, ... but what if, right? Because, and I think we were talking about it before lunch.
That's definitely an engineer's office. Right?
Several years ago, right, 10, 15 years ago, right, who would have modeled or thought about doing a full-scale exercise on a suboceanic earthquake that triggers a tsunami that then schwacks Japan and causes the worst nuclear disaster that we've seen thus far? I mean, and people would say, you're crazy. We're not going to waste the time or the money or the effort to full scale this thing or, or whatnot. One of the things, we do our exercises that we work with our DOW components, to turn off the lights at an installation, right? And that's a big deal. If you ask a CO, hey, boss, we're gonna turn off your lights real quick. Just shut everything down and see how you operate and see how those plans and procedures come into effect. That's a big deal. So not saying we don't need to do that. I think it's a great thing to do it in scale, but also model and simulate and work those plans and see, put your plans and everything else you have into it and run it and see if they're still there, right? See if it's still effective, see if it still means anything. And if it doesn't, then have the AI help you rewrite it, right? To keep these plans as up to date as possible, because a lot of times you're in a year, it's supposed to be like a year, 2-year cycle and all that. Most of them are 5 to 10 year cycles on writing your EOP. Unless you get a grant, then you get to use that money for it. But that's the thing, so real time, real world plans, real world information that comes in based upon, information you're seeing from the field, but also bouncing that against your simulations in those areas.
Yeah, and I don't know, we'll play good cop, bad cop, I guess, because that's absolutely necessary. Those AARs, all that stuff. Having gone to that wonderful college up there in Newport, Rhode Island, and having sat through the War Gamers class, that's if anybody's ever done it, it is interesting until you fall asleep halfway through the day. But it's a lot of procedural work, and then you're doing it by hand, right? So I think to get to those things, to get to those models and simulations, and this is one of the things that kind of countermands this big movement out there that I just read another Forbes article where AI is going to take over 90% of the jobs, and I'm just like, you have to have a base of knowledge somewhere, right? You have to have the understanding of how things actually operate. The machine can't do that on its own very easily, and it can't be heuristic. It can't go what if, not easily. Right. We are the bigger cognitive machine. We are the pilot, and I just think, to get to impact field operations and things like that, we've got to feed it something, and then we've got to give it rules. Like I did a NATO exercise a year or two, no, 2 years ago now, in the Baltic. And it was funny watching everybody argue about like the procedures, right? Like what is, and they had three vignettes. They had the peacetime, contest and wartime. And I just, I was getting tired, I guess, one day, and it was dark all the time. So I just kind of blurted out. I said, the only difference between contest and war is one of you doesn't know you're being attacked. And it's a pretty, pragmatic statement. But then they were all like, well, maybe we need to kind of change the posture of the defense. So move it up into contest, all the things that we want to do. And I went, yeah. And then, in today's world, move that into the models. Give those models a little bit of leeway and a little bit of leash to do things that explore the what if. If not, you're going to lose because the other guys are going to do it. They're not waiting.
So one of the challenges we talked about on the data side is, and I think this is at least in my experience, it's the sheer volume. Like the ability now to create data, is absolutely exponential. I mean, I'm standing here, I've got a phone right here. It's creating data as I'm just sitting here based on the variety of apps whose user agreement I signed without reading, as we all did. But if you take it back to events that have created large amounts of data. So Boston bombing was the first major law enforcement federal action that essentially was overwhelmed by publicly created information, specifically visual information. Because for the very first time, we all had the ability to take photos and not just take them, send them in real time. And you had thousands of people all around doing that. And the task force was quickly set up, had a very, very rudimentary ability to sift through that. But it certainly created a need, and they actually used it to great effect successfully. But that ability has only increased. I think I read recently that the vast majority of law enforcement visual information, so videos, pictures, et cetera, are not created by a law enforcement investigative body. They're created by us and sent in when a law enforcement investigation triggers. So you have a volume issue, you have a quality issue, or authentication reliability issue. But you also then have a requirement to go through it. And it's not a large leap from there to the fact that it's far cheaper to set up a CCTV camera for either a commercial entity or a public entity, the cameras everywhere, than it is to pay for someone to stand on that street corner, and hope that they stay awake. But then the problem then becomes the amount of information you are ingesting now also grossly exceeds your ability to process it in real time. And if you don't process it in real time, you store it, but even that has a finite limit because of cost, depending on the agency that you're talking about. So I know I'm referring more to visual information, but we're talking about those large reams of data, authentication. How do we apply AI? Because the majority of that information is generated in the field. That's where it's created, right? How do we get as close to that point of creation in a timely fashion to identify that risk or threat and ideally then mitigate or, in fact, impede it?
So, coming from, I owned a couple of systems when I was at CISA. One of them was what you may have heard of, the program called Einstein, the National Cyber Protection System. It's like a huge sensor net for networks that goes all the way around the trusted internet connections for the government as well as critical sectors. That system by itself, and that was only one of like 5 or 6 systems that were under my portfolio, generated about 9 petabytes of information a day. That's a lot. And so what our strategy there was you can't collect all that reasonably, especially on, our budget was gradually decreasing every year, right? So what that forced was what I would term as, again, a conversion to signal, because deterministic operations, right? I was trying to tell folks, that simply intelligence requires a lot of information, and you may or may not want to replay back through it to make some of the decisions. But when you are in a terminal operational capability, you have to make a decision. And so normally those two data-wise don't match up. So we, had a critical infrastructure problem. You probably heard about it. There's a little one called Volt Typhoon a year ago, 2 years ago now. And, trying to just get decisions out to the public. You have that, hey, I got to bring in the data. Well, the big argument there was what data and what do we do with it? So we had to get into classification of categories, and we had to combine different data and make different products out of it, because we had to frankly look at really interesting technologies at the edge. And I think it's funny because a lot of folks thought that was new. And the whole time I'm sitting there going, we've been doing that on the Navy side for a while. You don't take all the telemetry back from a P3 that's flying off the coast somewhere. You take signal back. You send that to Signella. They make that into an intelligence report. So this really wasn't a different pattern for me. And even when I worked at Google or Microsoft, I saw MSRC at Microsoft reduce twice that amount of data into 20 to 30 unique security operations center actions a day. I mean, it was incredible. A lot of that was reduction. A lot of that was edge processing and just sending back a yay or nay. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to, because again, the intelligence versus the operations. Intelligence should have that replay capability to a certain extent, but that's a different system. To get to operations and field operational success, you have to be determinate. And so that the indicators change, the way you bring in data, the way you process edge data, IoT, you'll hear that all the time. You'll hear, I need to be able to process at the edge. You know, whether it's telemetry, you know, the drones we work with, visual, you know, even that in the Boston bombing, when HSI did that, they had to reduce the data to get to, you know, 20 of these folks saw the same thing. That's a signal. So that's kind of where I look at it. Like, you're not going to get away from the data problem. And then, you know, we could talk for hours about the reliability and the integrity and the data lineage of that. Those are all important things that have to lead into this future of automation.
So another thing with that amount of data that's coming, especially if it's crowdsourced, right? That's coming in. It's not, we were talking about, you know, chain of custody for those things coming in. Is, you know, how much of it is malicious? How much is it polluted? How much is your you know, your op4, you know, deliberately polluting that information to send that signal to get everybody to look somewhere else?
They never do that.
Yeah, they never do that. And so that's important too. And so, you know, all that has to be taken with a grain of salt and run through a deep fake filter or something else, right? To filter that part out. And then you have to have an LLM that's trained enough and focused enough to be able to pick out what's important and what's not important, right? The wheat from the chaff there. And then from that point is where the, you know, the human has to come in, right? You know, some of our law enforcement friends there in the back of the room, you know, you can't give up that intuition, especially when you're in the field on things. You know, you're driving down, you always drive down, at least I did with my windows down, so you could just hear and feel what was going on outside. And you just go by and you don't really see anything where you're like, huh, let me just turn around real quick and see what you know, what's going on in here. And then you get into it, right? And so that's something I don't think AI can never replace that intuition and that existential context that you really don't know you have, but you have, either from you know, experience or from whatever. You just get that spidey sense that's coming in, or you're scanning through some pictures, right, real quick. It's like, wait, what was that? It has nothing to do with what you're really looking at, but it just triggered something in you, right, that you wanted to look at, and you go back and holy cow, it is something, right? So that's part of the piece where I don't think human will be able, you know, you hear human in and human on the loop, right? We can't replace that, especially when it comes to these, especially life and death decisions or homeland, you know, security decisions that we're working with or investigative type things. You have to have that human context.
Yeah.
So I want to maybe extrapolate a little bit on threats, because we spent a lot of time talking about what could potentially be incredibly complex threats. And I want to actually move a little bit more toward the mundane side of that. Those of us who have worked overseas in various combat operations, if our adversary ever decided to go back to 1968 Cold War and passing notes around, we'd be really dead in the water in certain regions of the world. Over the last 18 months, there's been a variety of criminal terror attacks in the United States. 14 months ago, New Orleans, New Year's Eve. About 3 months after that, Vancouver, Canada. And then May of last year, Liverpool, England. The commonality they all had was that they were vehicular born and somebody driving a vehicle straight into a crowd of people to horrific effect. That is not complex, and every one of us has that weapon sitting in our driveway ready to use anytime. How do we utilize AI to get after and prevent attacks that are mundane, whether they're premeditated or not, when it seems like so much of the conversation is about using AI to combat AI complex threats?
I'll bite. So, you know, real story. So I had just been sent over as contractor support to a certain command, and was working downtown DC. And boss came in, the 06 came in and said, "Hey, everybody, huddle up real quick. Let's talk real fast." And he basically said, "So, in a cave in Afghanistan, there was a hard drive that we found, and it had this complex on it. It had some of you on it. It had where you guys like to go after work, and all those things. And basically, there were some orders in there, saying you don't have to come here for the jihad and get trained and all that. Just get in a car or a truck and run over them through the sidewalks as they're crossing traffic, right?" And so that changed our posture a little bit. So we were ordering in pizza a lot more at that time and other things. So when you get to those type, especially with lone wolves, right? It's almost impossible to defeat a lone wolf that's out there who is self-inspired, right? Self-radicalized, and then does his own thing based upon their own beliefs and what they think will work. But anticipatory intelligence, intelligence drives operations, right? And so getting out in front of it, predictive intelligence, anticipatory intelligence, just really using AI, LLMs, and all the SIGINT and everything else that we can get our hands on to help develop that threat picture, right? That threat scope, that threat space that's there is highly important. And the intelligence apparatus, was degraded over time, and then we're slowly building it back up. Because you have to have that eyes out there, those things that are really looking beyond the visual horizon of what is and what, and more importantly, what could be, right? And AI can help filter some of that. It can help, make some leaps, but not great leaps in there. But that, like I said, it goes back to a human looking at that, making those leaps of faith, going, I don't know what this is, but it's something, and let's go on and pull the string on that some more. So, pulling the threads on these things, when I ran a cell at one point in time, and, people were like, hey, I don't think this is something, but I think it might be something. It's like, cool, start a card, pull that thread, let me know if you get anything, right? And those are those leaps that can actually lead to something that's out there that can help, and those almost air-gapped connections, right? There's no really solid connection from here to here, except an analyst going, there's something here. I just feel it deep in, there's something here. And then all of a sudden we've thwarted something that could have been major. So
one of the things I've been writing about lately is, and hoping not to cross the two streams in my life too much, but I'd written a public piece on national security to help state, local, tribal, because I've lived in both. And the system I owned, we didn't have to give classified intelligence back, but
right.
Like you said, getting, separating out those things at the big data scale as you move up from, a county to a state to, and even a municipality, it's immensely hard. But if you can get to that, and then you can confirm these things at a higher level, you don't have to send the data back down. You can just ask the question. And we had technologies that could ask the question, and they still do. There's technologies that you can ask the question and say, and get that level of confidence, because it's separated all those other things. I think like the computer vision side of it's really tough. Having seen some of the use cases, for things like Boston and others, the paths that humans take are very erratic, right, to a machine in general. And so trying to, get those well-worn paths of vehicles and things like that, and trying to make a decision about why is this one not going that speed, or why is this one not going that speed. It can be very, very difficult. Again, that's not the sharpest needle. That's just, you got to make a heuristic guess at a certain point. So the best thing that we can do there is, bubble those things up to the top, create as many of those cards as we can, and then start to reduce them until we get to, a level of probability. I try to tell folks, AI at the end of the day is just math. However sexy it's put up, however many terabytes or NVIDIA processors we throw at it. That area under the curve, statistically, as it gets tighter, that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for those scattering of data points to start to converge. And that's what it can do for us. But then we have to kind of put it in categories and say, okay, if there are 10 people here or 50 people there, what's the known target? I'm not sure it can do that on its own without a watch officer sitting there trying to figure out what they've seen, or figure out what they would do. That's a difficult one to run.
Right. Or using their past experience and being in the field and all that, mm-hmm. To rewrite the prompt, right? Yeah. Let's change this a little bit and try to really narrow this down and focus this prompt in to give me more of the information that I'm really looking for, or expand that prompt some. We're way too narrow here. Now we need to expand it some to get more information coming in.
Yeah, you talk about the what if. I always try to tell folks, like on the cyber side, we're almost too creative. There's too many what ifs, and sometimes I try to tell them our adversary in that space, whether it's criminal, industrial, nation state, they're just as lazy as we are. They've got the same most of the same constraints we have, and they've got other masters. So you kind of have to play to it as if would at the end of the day I've looked at course of action and gone, would I do that? And some of them, yes, some of them, no. There's been a few that surprised me, but I'd say that that's the smaller part. We can usually match up just by, human to human going, this is what I think would be the easiest path for various reasons. Can we improve the models with that? I think so. I think we've got a ways to go.
So I probably should have mentioned that at Booz Allen, I founded and lead our national public safety practice. So it's obviously something I'm kind of nerd out and passionate about on this end. So from that public standpoint, we're talking about, I'm moving to like transportation, again, the movement of people, which are generally the ripest of targets, densely populated and the rest. And of course, that was what we saw with the vehicular attacks. Public gatherings in the United States in 2023 drove $93 billion in revenue for the localities that hosted them. That makes the ability to get together a national security issue from an economic standpoint. And the World Cup coming up is going to be an enormous logistical challenge. And I'll be candid, I work in this world. It's not going well right now from a coordination standpoint. The vast majority of it has fallen on each of the 11 states and cities, and they are very much doing their own thing to the extent they can. And the money from the federal government has not arrived yet. So there's a lot of last minute scrambling. So with the transportation challenges, with the gathering challenges, how can government and industry essentially share AI-driven threats? Because everybody's analyzing something differently now, and comms are going to be absolutely key. How do they share those in a timely enough fashion to protect the folks or the transportation networks themselves, where disruption could be just even the goal itself? Where does AI play in that?
So I think this is, let's go left of boom right here. Yep. with the AI piece. Governance is key in that. Without disclosing too much stuff, I'm working on a data rights issue with data sharing, and it's a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare. Even without AI or anything else, I've worked, JTF, Instagram posts in the field, and all your law dogs are over here, and they won't talk to the civilian side. With the EPA, right? You had EPA CID running around trying to be the translator between the FBI and the responders in the field and stuff, and you just don't get you cannot paint a complete picture without that. So then throw in the new level of complexity with data rights issues that are out there. Okay, so I need this information. You can't have it. No, I need it. No kidding. This is important. And so we get into a lot of legalese. We get in a lot of horse trading. We get a lot. Hey, if I give you this, you give me this. I'll give you this, and then you get into the big problem at the end of the day when I develop a product, right? Who owns that end result, right? And so there's a lot, 15 pages of legalese. Sorry. That there's a lot of contract language, and they don't want it to be contract language, but it turns out to be contract language because it is, that you have to get out of the way up front, and that could take a year or more just to get through that negotiation of what that data is, how can I use it, how should I use it, where is it going to go, how's it going to be stored. A big thing out there now, is CMMC 2.0. ISO 27000, which luckily we were one of the first 300 that made that leap into CMMC 2.0, which is great. But can I legally even house this? I have people I can't send certain emails to because now they're not 2.0 certified, and so then with sharing the data, can I even put it on your system? Can I even email it? It's not classified as nothing else, but can I even email it to you because your system doesn't meet the cybersecurity standard?
Let me pivot that to Dave there, because I found the only larger obstacle than law is organizational culture when it comes to getting something done, and that can't be solved technologically. It's just that is especially in LEOs. But so how do we then get from that to the bias to action that is required to actually, because an emergent threat can only be countered with a bias to action.
So there's a couple of levels to it, and having been, I've signed connection agreements, probably a couple hundred of them when I was at CISA. It always came down, like you said, to organizational equity, or even in some cases personal or political equity. And in my world on that side, whether it's critical infrastructure, it was, my first argument was always machines do not have privacy rights. So let's start there, and then let's back into what these equities are. And as you strip it away, you start to realize that when it gets down to the actual things like computer vision, which has people's faces, and true privacy, or their records, true privacy, it's a fairly small amount of the bigger picture that gets you to the threat determination, gets you to the operation. So, but it's a long discussion because you've heard our prior panel saying we don't have a strategy. We don't. We have, President put out a cybersecurity strategy, but we don't have a data sharing strategy to speak of that. And I came from an agency where part of our binding agreement was holding folks harmless, right? I mean, if they shared information with us and they were a commercial entity, we were bound by law not to share that back out or to obfuscate it in a way that was equitable, right? That has lapsed since then. So you can imagine that's, right when we're getting into all these big, things like the World Cup and everything, all of a sudden we're back in that shaky, can't get it done type activity. So I think we need a strategy. I think we need to be rational about it, because those big data sets, those are going to be those things that are kind of like irrefutable. They're not going to be real changeable. They're going to be, hey, I saw this happened, this indicator compromise came in, bop, bang. And then it gets down to equities, and that goes both ways. I've seen, when I was out on the commercial side, I've seen folks saying, hey, we don't want to do business because we don't want to be outed as working with the federal government or working with intelligence. And then on the other side, you see it from the government standpoint. Just give me all your information. We're from the government. What could go wrong? I've seen it on both sides. And so I think without the strategy, we don't have a rationalization across that. I've seen privacy laws in other countries. I've testified, in 4 different jurisdictions across the world. And we're probably the one that doesn't have enough of that equity built in. I'll defer to my legal colleague, but I just don't see it.
Recovering attorney. I'm no longer practicing. That's because it's terrible.
Well, I was afraid you're going to give me a law of armed conflict briefing, and I was going to leave the room. But
now we'll have some beers afterward, because that's a little spicy topic right now. Before we get to closing comments, I think we'll keep us on track here. But I want to open it up to the crowd here to see if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, objections, complaints. Preferably not the latter. And if you don't, I know at least 6 people in the audience who I will call on by name. Yes, sir.
This is Chris Sabo with JTFCS. I work in emergency management, support FEMA and other partners.
Thank you.
Challenge internally for 15 years. I've been in command. FEMA in the States use WebEXE, DOD using SharePoint and Palantir. Freaking nutload. So hopefully there will be some standardization and some trust so that we can collaborate with another.
Yeah, I think if it starts at the data, you can, as you move up the stack, so to speak, you can level some of that out. But the strategy has to reflect. Then the data comes, gets aligned in the strategy, and then you can put the front end on it. It's like any, if you coded any type of application, data, application, presentation, right? And that's the problem you're having. You're over here on the presentation side going, come on, folks, you can do better. But there's fundamental problems on the back end that you can't get to yet.
Yeah, hopefully using MCP and some other things we can take in from WebEOC, Team, Blue 292, all the old things I used to work with, and just bring it into a true combined comp, right? A universal comp that we can then utilize, because it's useless if I can't communicate in a meaningful way to who needs to know it, right?
What's going to drive it first? It's expensive, right? And so they're going to have to bring it down to a dull roar.
And the expenditures, unfortunately, typically only follow a massive failure or a catastrophic event versus a quiet success, which does not drive much action at all. I mean, it only took 9/11 to build the National Counterterrorism Center, whose sole solution was, let's put everybody in the same building and maybe they'll talk. They don't, if you work there. Good folks. Yes?
Mitch Simmons from Windsor Community Electric Cooperative. After getting out of the weeds with all this discussion right here, I come to a conclusion that in cybersecurity world, we share our information,
For the most part.
And what I'm hearing on your end is there's too many legalese, and I'm going to go ahead and add the accountants in that too, because you kept bringing up money. So, and another thing, the most dangerous thing isn't driving. The most dangerous thing is you're the passenger and your wife's driving, you tell her she's wrong. That's the most dangerous thing. But what I'm trying to say is when you have all this information and you're wondering what to do with it, and you're talking situational awareness and the crowd problems and things, my focus would be, since I spent almost 6 years of my life on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, and we had that situational awareness pounded into us. Don't go to the officers. Don't go to the enlisted guys. Go to the guys that have been on the ground and had to deal with that situational awareness and see what they say. You know, don't sit there and crunch the numbers and try to come up with some kind of answer. Go to these guys, go to us and say, hey, what did you do? You know, go to the Platts and whatever acronym they use for the cameras on the aircraft carriers. Take that information and plug that in. All the cameras they have all around the world now, especially in the concentrated areas in traffic, take that information. And then you can input that into the camera systems and the AI. Okay, we got a car coming over here going a little bit too fast, just like you said. We could have guys out there with those devices that they punch into a car that kills the system. You know, those are the things right there that would be easy to do, and it wouldn't take, you know, millions and millions of lines of code to figure it out. It's trying to get away from the weeds of it and look at the common sense of it. And that's what I'm getting all this from.
Well, first of all, we do share information. It's not pretty, it's not normal. A lot of times, you know, I've seen it, you know, all the way down to municipality. What I can tell you is, yes, you do need those. I think you need to come at it from both directions. The aircraft carrier, you need operating instructions. You need commander's critical items of information. That's how that starts. These are the things I need to know all the time, every day, especially in cyber. I've been trying to put this out there lately, you know, the command and control aspect up here, high C2, then you have analytics, and then you have the deck plate, right? Where you're taking in information and you're making it into littler packages of things that you know as a technician. That information we seem to share okay. It's when we diversify into, again, you got to take that and make it into a common format so that people can reuse it, right? I had 3 levels when I was at CISO. I found very interesting. I always ask my folks, like, who's your customer? And my engineers, because I ran mission engineering, would go, well, threat hunt or vulnerability management. I go, no. Who's your customer? And that was anybody. We had large language models. We could send those out to big companies. They knew what to do with them. We sprinkled them with a little bit of information and sent it back out. But we knew the intent. It followed a named operation. We combined it with national intelligence, sent it out. That was a fairly easy one to do with folks who understood how to use it. But then you get to the mid-range where they may understand how to use it, but they don't have the capability. So then you got to help with the capability. And then the last one was always interesting. You had little, I always joke around, if you've heard me speak before, the marine mammal, folks in Florida, for example. Real organization, but you can imagine an organization like that, the CIO, the CTO, and the CISO, and everybody else are the same person, and they're a biologist. So the product you could give to them would be, I just need a pane of glass. Tell me the 5 things I need to do. Tell me what my version of CMMC is, or maturity. Those are simple things, but you got to kind of, I think, to get, when we share information, I think to get it to be useful, we have to kind of live in those different categories of customers. Otherwise, you can't, you overshoot, you undershoot, or you do the tired thing and go, well, here you go, and drop it on their lap. I think we all have to do better. And then on the operating instructions, deck plate comes in here with the, here's how things work. And we've all done it, right? You've gone through an inspection in the military, for example. Evaluator comes in and says, here's the book. And you go, nah, that's not what we do. Because it'll, it's too slow, might get us killed, that type of thing. I've done it. And so that, but that usually, if they're a good evaluation, feeds back up and changes these things up here, these operating instructions, because assumptions change. So I don't know how we do that well without again, I got to go back to strategy. We need somebody to put their foot down and say, this is what has to happen to get past these big problems. Yeah, get stuff done.
So maybe one quick question, then we're going to do closing comments from our 2 speakers. Sir, send it.
Thank you for coming. My name is Carroll from Expeditionary Warfare Development Center in North. My question kind of goes across the 4 instances of power dominant through the type of information, military, economic, and industry. That any leader that's out there in that field operation type environment, especially for military or really competent type situation, it's got to have mission type relations. you talk about pilot and co-pilot, use of AI. I don't know if writing mission type orders has become a lost art, or being able to follow mission type orders has become a lost art. We aren't using AI being able to help out in that kind of situation where the field operators can operate against an emergent threat.
So I think the most simple answer to your question is both, right? It's a lost art to write them, and for some reason, people aren't following them, right, when you're in the field. Where AI can come in, AI tutoring, the AI 2x4, I don't know what the right answer to that is. But, given enough context, enough information, you can build a system to give you a 70% plan. I still always throw in what I call the Battlestar Galactica protocol. You want a human in and on the loop, and even certain systems you want totally air-gapped from AI, right? So the Cylons don't take over, and that's an important thing as we're going through that, right?
I'd go even, Dr. Falk and Shall We Play a Game?
Yeah.
For those of us who are old enough to remember that.
Yeah.
Bad things happen to good people.
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day. Context is a big part of that too, right? Understanding your operational context in there, and that's something that AI won't give you. So I think it's building better leaders and better troops, better folks in uniform. So go ahead.
Man, keying in on that critical thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody tells me that my son's in college, and I they're the AI, and I teach as well. So it's like the AI versus not AI, and I'm like, my hope, and I think I've said this in other forums, is that if we have a generous amount of, I don't want to say distrust, it's the wrong word, but skepticism, then we become the critical thinker. And that's where you're going, right? I mean, you got to write those OIs. Well, how do you write those OIs? You used to have folks who are have been around 30 years, would look at it and go, yeah, that won't work, this will work, this is a better, or they took in the heuristic postulates and then they passed it through a few different filters of different viewpoints, legal, operational, intelligence, whichever venue you're in. But I think the best uses I've seen, and I've done a few of these, which is let's write the operational instruction. OI, JQR, maybe, I've actually had it, here's what I want. And then you start reading it, and it occurs to you that it goes and collects data from a wide variety of sources that it has access to. And then it comes back, but it's not always right. And I think that's the beauty of the interaction that we can have with it. But then the quandary becomes, how do we not offload, and this is important for institutions like this and others, how do we not offload that heuristic understanding of what's going on? I think it's because you have to have people do the work in order to actually understand how to automate and streamline the work. And I don't know the cross section of that yet, but it does give me hope. It's kind of a strange thing. Like, it makes you more efficient. You can write, you can recompose things very fast, but you can't trust it all the time. And so, and then I try to figure out, like, what do I trust? Well, I trust the fact that I've been around a few more decades than most, and I've done this for a while. And you just know what's right and what's not. And I don't know how we get there, but I do think it's a discussion that institutions like this and others and in the public forums we should have. I think gives our kids hope, gives students something to shoot for and value, rather than going, well, the computer's going to do it all for me anyway.
All right, so in 30 seconds each, is there any final comments you'd like to make related to this august topic?
Sure. So I appreciate the opportunity for being here. I really enjoyed the time and speaking with you before and now. I think this is a great discussion. Just ask what if with all these things. Be curious, ask what if. Don't always take the answer the computer gives you as gospel. The internet is not always true and right on things. And understand that there are malicious actors out there that are planning information, that are deliberately putting information out there to train models on so they give us the wrong answer, right? So be curious and skeptical.
Yeah, thank you all very much. This is the second time us being here at Christopher Newport on stage, and I enjoy it thoroughly, and I enjoy the questions. I like I said, there's an amount of joy that I get I didn't start this way. I remember being told at one of my jobs, because I was the head of data protection and cloud security, that I was denial as a service. I went, okay, but what it was I wasn't taking enough time to understand my colleagues. One of the colleagues was the chief data officer, and he did not understand, and had a lot of regulations, privacy rules. But I think what I missed there and what I've gotten back to is a sense of wonder, right? I don't want to code Python. I don't want to mess with large language models, small area models, whatever it is. But I find it fascinating, and I find it interesting to watch. And if you watch your kids or younger folks get into it, this is an opportunity. Like it's going to get different once we get to quantum and things like that. But it's an opportunity to kind of be that old salt and walk in and say, because it creates, like, social media, for example, creates an amount of stress. Help make it wonder and not stress. And that's what I would say. I really appreciate coming here to convey is that I think there's a certain amount of optimism, and institutions like this, smart folks. So let's support them.
Oh, thank you. One quick note, just going over things I might have missed, just so you all know, related to our public safety stuff, FEMA is doing still quiet, incredible work, and they're incredibly well needed. I want to thank Christopher Newport University Center for American Studies. And just to follow up on your incredibly arcane reference, only a certain amount of people in the audience would get. If your computer asks you to play a game, do not select global thermonuclear war. Thank you very much.